All right, can everybody see the screen okay? Yeah, so my name's Andrew Poklepovic. I'm a medical oncologist, so a cancer doctor who gives IV treatments, chemotherapies, immune therapies at the Massey Cancer Center. I specialize in skin cancer, so I'm the primary skin cancer doctor. Do a lot of skin cancer research with clinical trials. I treat patients with advanced skin cancers, but we're also, focused on prevention and early detection across a variety of things. And so I was asked to give this talk because it's the summertime, UV radiation is the highest. It's when people get sunburns. It's when people are out and doing things. And how do you protect yourself from UV radiation? And as I get into that, a lot of what I do in clinic is really the science of biology and how does cancer grow and how do you give treatments and how do you manage the side effects. But what is UV radiation? So actually, when I was creating this talk, I sort of was like, oh, I'm gonna have to, buff up my astronomy and my space science chops, because it's really about understanding kind of just the magnitude of the things that are coming out from the sun, and then how does that impact our skin, and how do we take all that information, assimilate it, take the best care of ourselves. And I'll try to answer a couple of questions that people have, because there's sort of these fads that come and go of being tan, of getting more sun exposure, and then fads of not doing that as much. And we've seen that skin cancer, especially in women, has increased a lot since the 1970s with sort of the societal changes and kind of the clothes that we wear when we're out doing things. You just think everything was more formal. You would wear jackets. We were in the Bahamas with my family a couple of weeks ago, and they had some photographs of this hotel like around 1900. And everybody's wearing wide brim hats, jackets. Like, it looked hot, but it was also, they were totally protected. And so what does it mean? So, when you think of the sun, you sort of this bright, beautiful thing in the sky, but like how powerful is the sun exactly? And what does it do? What is it emitting to us? And so one of the astronomy things that came to me that I didn't even realize was, the energy released by the sun in 1 second is more energy than all of humankind has ever generated in existence since the Industrial Revolution and beyond. Like, it's kind of staggering to think about the scale of energy that comes out of the sun. Now, you see these, coronal mass ejections where there's huge bands of, basically magnets and space flares and all sorts of energy being released. And then when you start to think about just how big we are compared to how big the sun is, it just gives you that sense of scale. This is so tremendously powerful, and we happen to be in that little window where too much closer and you're going to get blasted away by all the energy rays. Too far away, things have started to taper off, and you're a frozen ice world. And so we really are that pale blue dot in the sky, and really dwarfed by the size and the power of the sun. So all of these energies come out in the form of waves. What we see, everything around us, is the visible light spectrum. You've heard of infrared, so that is a slower wavelength. And the way you look at that is, so we have these, so the big long waves or radio waves, those are about the size of a building. And then microwaves, infrareds, visible, ultraviolet, and then as you get into X-rays and gamma rays, which are the really powerful ones, the frequency, the sort of the distance between each wave gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you're down at the size of atoms and atomic nuclei by the time you get to these high energy waves. Ultraviolet's down at the size of molecules. And the only part that we actually see is the visible light spectrum. So my daughter's 4 and she loves going through the visible light spectrum and seeing all the colors. But the sun releases all of this. And much of it is stopped by the atmosphere, the magnetic poles, where we think about the aurora borealis, as well as the ozone layer in the stratosphere, not low-level ozone, and we'll get to that in a minute, but high-level ozone. We can see visible light, but some animals can actually see ultraviolet light because there's a lot of it that comes through. And so birds actually have receptors in their eyes, and they can see into the ultraviolet spectrum, and it makes them, what they see in the world from each other and flowers. Birds of prey can hunt rodents in the field by seeing where they mark their trail to their burrows with urine, because urine reflects ultraviolet rays. So they're looking, soaring up high, looking for glow lines to go find their way down to the animals, right? Some really, really, really neat science on this. And so imagine what you look like to a bird slathered in sunscreen when you go see it. I grew up with parrots, and my parents raised birds, and I always would think about that when I would have all my sunscreen on growing up in Florida. Like, what do you look like? It's a kind of zombie mask that you have going on. So ultraviolet rays come in 3 subcategories in that higher energy frequency. There's UVA, UVB, and UVC. And the ozone layer is 100% effective at blocking UVC, and it is very effective at blocking UVB, but it doesn't really stop UVA. So we'll be spending time talking about what UVA is, UVB, and UVC. And just the way to think about it as we go back to that energy frequency, within the ultraviolet, you've kind of got the lower frequencies, the intermediates, and the higher frequencies. And that's where the C is over there on the right. So what does it look like coming down to you? There's 2 types of ozone, right? You've heard of ozone alert days where there's air quality indexes. You're not supposed to be outside. And there's, for living organisms on Earth, there's good ozone and bad ozone. And it really just depends on where is the ozone. And so the things that come down as low atmosphere ozone is essentially smog. It's exhaust. It is industrial pollution. And that causes breathing problems. That's down here. And ozone's O3 as opposed to O2. So here is about as high as planes go. That's the troposphere. And then as you get higher up, you get into the stratosphere. And that's where the ozone is. And that is where it completely blocks UVC from getting in. And UVB is reduced by about 95%, but UVA really gets all the way through. There is some minor degrading of UVA and UVB as it goes through the atmosphere and the troposphere. And so higher elevations, you get more radiation exposure than low elevations. So what is the Earth sunscreen? Well, that's the ozone layer. And we probably all remember kind of what is this, the hole in the ozone? We have this giant hole in our ozone layer that didn't used to exist. They first started detecting it in the 70s, and they really started to figure it out in the 90s. And the world got together and said, this is a problem. We don't want a hole in the ozone layer. That's a lot of UV radiation that's going to come through. And they figured out it was stuff that was in refrigerant, those CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. And in 1996, essentially, almost the entire world eliminated CFCs. And the rest of the countries that were kind of holdouts stopped after that fact. And these CFCs would basically bind stratospheric ozone and break it down. And at its worst, 2006, the hole in the ozone, it took 10 years from when they phased out the CFCs that the ozone actually started to shrink. And that's what this picture is. The blue dot is the hole. But the hole in 2006 was 27 million square miles. And think about how big that is. That's beyond the skies of Antarctica. There were zones overlapping with Australia and other components of the southern hemisphere, and it's shrunk. It's been static for the last couple of years, ranging between 8 and 10 million square miles, but certainly an improvement from its worst at 27. And so fortunately, this does appear to be something that is gradually going to improve over the course of our lifetime. It has more implications for folks living in the southern hemisphere necessarily than for us, but it's also important to know that when you can measure what human-made chemicals are doing to something, and then you can embark upon a mitigation strategy, you can actually affect change over time. So how are the different ways that you get, radiation? So there's reflections. Light waves bounce off, just like you can see things in a mirror, shining something, you see colors reflected. So you can have it directly from the sun. You can have it reflected by ground surfaces or water, so reflecting off of a lake while people are swimming on their face. It can be reflected or scattered by clouds. And this is really UVB. UVA actually goes through clouds, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this is a chart of what the UV index is over a global map. So North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. And this is in January. So the southern summer, here's where the equator line is as a reference for kind of how it cuts through. And you can see really lots of intensity in our winter months, their summer months there. And then as we get into summer, it's really our summer months and largely in the desert Southwest to the mountain west, where ultraviolet light is at its worst. And it fluctuates seasonally. And so here's an image, and NASA keeps track of all of this. So you can pull various different figures, and this was the UV index. So, you can get that on your phone app. UV index is high today, it's 10, it's low today, it's 3. That has a lot to do with time of year, location of the sun, atmospheric conditions, etc. And this is June, July, August, and September in the US in 2015. And the orange, the darker the color, the reds and the browns are the highest UV index, over 10s. Yellow's about 10. And then as you move into the fall, September, as we get temperatures starting to cool, we're not quite facing the sun as directly, it goes away. And what you'll notice here is really Colorado gets the worst of it at those high altitudes. You get about a 10 to 15% increase in UV radiation for about every half mile of elevation. So the Mile High City, is getting close to that, probably about 20% more UV there than here. Plus, they also have 300 days of summer. It's often quite dry there, and it has one of the higher incidences of melanoma in the US. If you look back ancestrally, so indigenous people, humans adapted to UV radiation, potentially for some reason related to sun and skin protection, but there's also some fertility things about how too much UV radiation for continuous periods can impact folate, which is an essential prenatal vitamin. Most people will get skin cancers after the reproductive period, so it shouldn't necessarily do with selection. But if you're burned to a crisp and you can't go outside and hunt or farm, it's going to really impact you. But if you look, it's really the same as what we were looking at with the UV index, over time, kind of here, right? Where skin tones change across that middle band, approximating the equator. Now, with migration all over, we have ancestral Scandinavians that are living in Arizona. We have people that are ancestrally African that are living in Scandinavia. And so there are other things to take into consideration that as bodies have adapted over generations, there are things to take into consideration. But it's important to see this is why we are the skin colors that we are. And so what does radiation do to things over time? Right? We've all seen faded signs, broken plastic tarps and things that just sort of break down. And you're like, oh, that's been sun bleached. Sun bleaching is really what the effects of this ultraviolet radiation are. And so, what does it do to us? Well, because the wavelengths are different, UVB has got that narrower wavelength than UVA, all of which are tighter than visible light. UVB rays go and stop kind of in the dermis, and they're shorter, and they make up about 5% of your UV radiation exposure, and UVA rays go deeper, all the way down into the hypodermis. And we classically refer to UVA as things that make you get sun aging and can contribute to cancer development, and then UVBs are what give you sunburns and can really drive skin cancers, but it makes up a minority. UVA does contribute to skin cancer development. And here's some examples of people. That's Will Ferrell, just because I had to throw something fun in there, having gone to a tanning bed. But, the peeling burn, I was just in the Bahamas and most everybody, was red as a tomato or starting to peel. So what does that do over time? The vanity of youth is I must be tan, but the vanity of aging gracefully is I really don't want to be tan from the sun or from tanning beds. And here's an example. This is called dermatohiliosis. This was a 69-year-old guy who had a 25-year history of just gradual thickening of the skin on his face. He had driven a delivery truck for 28 years. And UVA goes right on through your window glass if you don't have tint on it. In Virginia, you're not allowed to tint your windshield or do much to your front windows. In fact, many cars aren't even sold with that. Or you're driving with the window down, arm out, and things of that nature. You can get UVA blocking tint on your windshield. It blocks 99.9%, so it's quite good. But what happens is this chronic UVA exposure results in thickening of the outer layer of the skin and destruction of the elastic fibers, the stuff that makes your skin bouncy and have that youthful bounce to it. And then here's an example. People took this image and spliced it. What would happen if he had not had any sun? The left half of his face versus the whole side of his face and sun. And so that, to me, is what I tell folks when they're talking about sun hygiene and wanting to look good and be tan. It's like, go get a spray tan if you really need to be tan for an event, but you don't want to be aging in a way that is preventable. And what does it look like under a microscope is called solar elastosis. So underneath your outer layer of your skin, which is this is sort of like the skin that's flaking off, and then these are the cells that make the stuff that flakes off, and then this is all your deeper tissues. You'll see on the right that there are these big, thick pink fibers that are kind of all thick and rolled around like here. And then if you look on the left side, they're thin. They look like snapped rubber bands. And this is the destruction of the elastin in your skin. It gives it that bounce, that youthful lack of wrinkles. And what that looks like on people is thickening skin, sort of deep creases along the mouth lines and along in here. Here's the hands and, a baby's hand just for reference. So, when people put on sunscreen, always put it on the tops of your hands. These are always out and about and in the sun. Put it on your face. It will keep you looking younger for longer. But it's not just your skin. There's other parts of your body that are affected by UV radiation. And so cataracts can develop. And cataracts have actually been seen to have some increased frequencies in darker skinned individuals. There may be additional reasons beyond UV radiation. In general, darker skin is protected from much of the damaging effects of UV radiation. So skin cancers are far less common in darker skinned individuals, but they still occur. I do have Asians, I have folks from Latin America, I have folks from the Indian subcontinent, the Middle East, I have Black people, some of which are various tones of lighter skin. There is, the history in some people of having Caucasian ancestry, not to their own choices, but, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, those things were more common, but cataracts and eye injuries occur across the racial spectrum. And so how do you protect that? Well, you can reduce your risk with a hat and sunglasses. There are other things that are associated with cataracts, like tobacco and diabetes and alcohol use, but there is absolutely a dose exposure relationship between UV radiation and the cataract development. So thinking about cloudy and rainy days, I said UVA, the thing that actually ages you, can penetrate through clouds. It goes through the ozone layer. It goes deeper into your skin. Its wavelength is one that goes right on through. It is not disrupted by clouds. It is not disrupted by, rain, and it can actually go through cheap umbrellas too. UV radiation can go through that as well. So UVB are blocked by clouds. And so you should still be wearing sunscreen as part of your just general morning regimen. And that will protect you throughout. So what about cancer, and why does this radiation cause skin cancers? It's associated with multiple types of skin cancer. These cancers can occur anywhere on the skin. You'll see them a lot on the face. You'll see them in backs and shoulders, upper neck, where people are wearing tank tops. Commonly, you'll see them on the legs if people are wearing shorts. Florida could be your foot. Your feet and ankles don't have to get sunburned to, be exposed to UVB radiation. So the UVA penetrates more deeply into the skin, like we talked about. It causes genetic damage to cells and photoaging and immune suppression. And UVB goes into the top layer and has more energy and causes more DNA damage, which is a significant risk factor for skin cancer, especially melanoma. So what does that look like? Well, the UV radiation essentially causes the DNA strands to break. And every time you have a break in your DNA, you have the onset of repair systems that try to put it together, but it's all chemical reactions, and you get errors that start to accumulate. And the way you think about it is everybody who goes through life has, it has the slot machine of luck. And you basically have a number of pulls for just being alive. You have a pull. You never know when you're going to have some random thing happen as a health issue or a cancer, right? Cancer can affect little kids. Cancer cannot affect somebody who's 80 years old. There's always a chance. But, as anybody who's ever played the slot machines, some people have big tubs of coins and some people just have a few. And it's what you expose yourself to, carcinogens, that basically add more tokens to your slot machine of life. And the more times you damage your DNA, whether it's tobacco smoke and lung cancer, whether it is chemicals and other forms of cancers, whether it is UV radiation and skin cancer, this is what happens. So you're basically laying out in the sun, trying to get as rested as possible, and you're basically just adding tokens to your slot machine. So the two most common types of cancer that are triggered by UV radiation are squamous cell carcinomas. Mm-hmm. I don't have too many gross photos, I promise. You don't want them. I know. So these are squamous cell carcinomas, and they can show up as these weird thick crusts that don't really clear up or go anywhere, or they can kind of look like sores with a little bit of an ulcer. They can grow kind of quickly. They could come up over the course of 3 to 4 weeks, because what's really happening is, as that slot machine's going, you're changing this. Oh, now you got 5 cherries. Now you've triggered the proliferation, the growth of cells, the development of the actual cancer. And so these can grow quickly, but they're typically, they make up about 20% of the common forms of skin cancers. Basal cells make up most. And then melanomas are a small percentage, but the most important to think about. And these are generally removed at a dermatologist's office every now and then. If somebody didn't get to the doctor in time and is much bigger, you might need to see a surgical oncologist who does larger surgeries, not Mohs procedures. There's an immune system role in maintaining clearance of skin cancers. So people who have had organ transplants have about 25 to 30 times the rate of skin cancer development as people who have not had an organ transplant, because we're suppressing their immune system. So that's part of what UVA radiation exposure does by blunting your body's immune system response. These are what basal cells look like. So they can be reddish, they can be raised, they can be these flat patches. They can be a flat patch with a red ring around it, or a shiny little pearl, often with these little red blood vessels in them. And so these are the most common skin cancer. And then you can't do a talk on skin cancers and UV radiation without kind of talking about melanoma and identifying this. These are dangerous. And if you catch them early, you're done. If you catch them late, you could be on treatment for long periods of time. And they can come back. So the 5, I guess these are the 4. The E is evolution, but the A, B, C, Ds of melanomas, asymmetrical. So if you draw a line through the middle of a spot and it's perfectly symmetrical one side to the other, that is more likely to be normal, because normal things grow in normal patterns, whereas atypical and mutated things kind of grow out like amoebas. And so you can see this is asymmetrical. There's no line you can mark through this. The border should be clear, clean, and crisp, as opposed to kind of fading out. Where does this actually end? Is it over here? Is it over here? The color, it's uniform because it's a standard process, versus dark, light, medium. And then the diameter, how big is it? Is this something that's greater than 1/4 inch? And then the last one is the ABCDEs, it's evolution. Is there something on your body that has changed? Was this mole here and now it's doing something different? Is it just not acting like any other part of me? Don't wait. One secret for getting into a dermatologist, because you're always like, I need a skin check, because as a regular person, you're like, I have this thing on my skin, I need you to check it. And that's what you say. But to a dermatology practice, a skin check is like a full physical exam that they only have X number of slots for per day. Whereas if you say, I need a spot check on a mole that's a problem, it's doing different things, then they have these like quick visit slots that they can put in there. And so it's always asked for a spot check. I have a changing mole, something's different. I don't need a whole body skin check. I just want this looked at, because you really don't want to wait. So we talked about mutations, and this is a mutational map of cancers. Because so all cancers are mutated versions of you. The cells that are supposed to do this and not do that are now not doing this, but doing that. And that happens from mutations, whether it's just natural age associated mutations, just that we've been here long enough, cosmic rays, the rest of it, and just time, random chance, or we've done things to ourselves. And so the two most mutated cancers, that's on the right-hand side, you can see just the bigness of the bars here, is melanoma and lung cancers in smokers, right? So everybody thinks and knows that smoking cigarettes is dangerous to your health. It causes lung cancer. Well, the sun is dangerous to your health and causes melanoma skin cancer. And they're essentially the same. And what happens when melanoma can get out is that it can spread everywhere. So everywhere you see the dark dots on the panel A, that's where melanoma had spread to in this person. Now, what I do is treat these patients with these modern immune therapies, and we can save lives with them. We can have patients who a decade ago, it was certain death within a few months, now can become long-term survivors and even be cured. And the way we do that is actually by going back to these mutations. The more mutated a cancer is, the more different it is from the rest of you. And the greater the probability that if we activate your immune system to be like, let's get rid of this stuff that's not good, it'll recognize these mutations as different. And just like the immune system can keep you protected from tetanus, if you had a tetanus shot and step on a rusty nail, it can also protect you from cancer trying to escape. And so immune therapy has been transformative for the treatment of cancers. And the two cancers that it really, hit its first home runs in were melanomas and lung cancers. And now they're basically the staple of how we treat these diseases. So the patient in this panel B is actually that person, same person, on immune therapy, having a deep response and doing better. So that's good. When I talk to patients kind of about sun hygiene and the development, I really liken cigarettes are to lung cancer as the sun is to skin cancer. It is the big tobacco in the sky. So how do you protect yourself? Well, sunscreens are the way to go. And sunscreens come in a variety of scents, SPFs, different types of minerals. This was the top 2024 sunscreens, I think by Condé Nast or something. So, but my personal preference are to use the ones that have the minerals in them as opposed to some of the chemicals. So the minerals are titanium and zinc. And those are not absorbable. There are questions that people have about, there are some sunscreens like the spray-on ones, you can move on real quick. Those can actually be absorbed into your bloodstream and be detectable. We don't yet know if that does anything to people. There hasn't been any evidence that it does, but it's the fact that it was detectable had the FDA say, well, now more research has to be done. Does this actually matter? Well, you don't have to worry about that if you use the titaniums and the zincs, and it'll say that. It will also tell you that that sunscreen is reef safe because the chemicals are the ones that get absorbed are also the ones that leach and kill coral reefs. So if you're just looking for some sort of protective sunscreen that you don't have to worry about your fish, you don't have to worry about yourself, you can, get some that has titanium or zinc in it. Our personal preference for when we go to the beach, and we took this ourselves to the Bahamas, is sun shading. So this is a UPF protective tent that basically uses sandbags for propping and a couple of poles right here in the middle. And this is fully blocking UV rays. So what's nice about this is rather than being under an umbrella that's like all blocked and you don't have any breezes, you're actually, full panoramic views and be able to be in the shade. And so this is how I sit when I'm at the beach myself. While you're driving, you can get your windows tinted. Virginia has some laws that they've adjusted over time where they don't really like your windshield or your front windows to be tinted very much. It used to be they would pull you over for it and give you a ticket. Now they won't pull you over for it and give you a ticket. If you have it and you don't have what's called a sun shading waiver, then you can get a ticket. It's a couple $100. But if you've ever had a skin cancer, you can get a waiver from the DMV, gets added to your registration, and then you are allowed to tint your windows to about 30% on the windshield and a little bit more on the front. I have that on all my cars. I've had a couple of skin cancers, having grown up in Florida and being on the swim team and all the reflected light. And I can tell you, if you go with what is the state legal allowance with the sun shading waiver, it doesn't impact your driving at all. It's not like you're trying to cruise South Beach where nobody can see inside. It is enough that you can drive at night. It's enough that even on a really bright day, you might still want to have your sunglasses on. But what you don't feel is that heat of the sun coming through the window, getting on your arm, getting on your face, that 5 o'clock traffic kind of stuff. The other great thing, sunscreen wears off. Sunscreen has to be reapplied. You can forget, you can be sloppy about it. Then you end up with like tiger stripes and that grand handprint. Everybody had a friend that did that one time on spring break, and they came back with like a white hand on their back and sunburn everywhere else. So UPF clothing has really, really made its way into, easy to get. It's not just at, Dick's Sporting Goods and REI. Many companies make it. And UPF is UV protection factor. UPF 30 allows a 30th, so 3% of UV radiation to pass through it. Anything that's UPF 50 is only 1/50th, so about 2%. And then 50 plus, which is what you'll see, is less than 2%. So rash guards that like surfers wear, the leggings that they wear as well, hoodies, t-shirts, golf shirts, they are all coming with it now. And if you pay attention, you look at fishing competitions, what you see are that these pro fishermen that are out there on the river all day, they're always wearing long sleeves, or hats with a brim, and you can fully protect yourself. Over time, after maybe about 2 years, they will start to lose some of their efficacy. So you need to upgrade your wardrobe here and there, but it's certainly worth having some of that, especially if you're going to be out somewhere and be exposed to UV radiation. If you've ever had a skin cancer, there is a supplement that has been proven in a clinical trial to reduce the risk of future skin cancers. So nicotinamide or niacinamide, two names for the same thing. It was only complicated enough to say one way, they had to make it both ways. It's essentially vitamin B3. It's one of your B vitamins, and it helps to reduce UV damage. And so they did a study, published it about 6-7 years ago, looking at almost 400 people who had all had a couple of skin cancers, and they took this vitamin twice a day or a placebo for a year. And at 1 year, there was 20% fewer basal cells and 30% fewer squamous cells. Essentially a vitamin supplement can cut your risk of skin cancer. And then once they stopped the supplement, that effect kind of went away. It's kind of an as you're on it sort of thing. Some sunscreens at the kind of the higher end designer levels will come with niacinamide in the sunscreen as well. There's some face sunscreens that put it in there. And again, part of this is also to help with the aging of skin. So as you think about all the things you can do to protect yourself from the sun, questions always come up because there's kind of this pull and tug about, well, if you don't get sun, how are you supposed to be healthy? We're supposed to be out. We're supposed to be in the sun. And rest assured, I do not promote living indoors in a cubicle. My favorite things to do, all of them are outside. It's just really about trying to be safe. And so one question is about vitamin D. Well, I need to get my vitamin D for the day. Well, yes, but you're pretty much going to get the vitamin D that you need. Very little exposure to sunlight is actually needed. 15 minutes of just your arms 3 times a week is more than enough. So it's not like you got to be out there for hours just to get your vitamin D. You're already going to have plenty. No studies that formally looked at sun protection, meaning sunscreens, and vitamin D levels were able to show a link between sun protection and low vitamin D. There were some studies in the Middle East and in Pakistan that did find that there were some women who wore burqas that had lower levels of vitamin D. Burqas are the full body cover. They're never supposed to be outside without them. But there are also other dietary restrictions and influences on that. And so you can get vitamin D through what you eat. And so cheese, milk, peas, parsley, beans, kale, eggs, fish, tuna, and salmon are great for it. Mushrooms. And then cereals are actually often fortified with vitamin D. So much of what you would want is already there. And then for people that have persistently low vitamin D, rather than expose yourself to excessive amounts of sun to try to make up for it, there are oral supplements that people can take. We mentioned sunscreen levels in the blood. So oxybenzone and oxinoxate, I think is how you say it. Octinoxate, OMC, are the 2 main compounds used in spray-on sunscreens. But they're also not just in spray-on sunscreens, right? You'll see them in cosmetics, you'll see them in fragrances, lip balms, and other things. And these are the ones that cause damage to coral reefs. We don't really yet know about what they do to people. There is some potential for it to disrupt hormone levels when given in enormous quantities to very small animals, which doesn't really translate to very, very tiny quantities in larger animals like us. But the non-absorbable sunscreens with zinc or titanium are considered reef safe. So if you go and buy a reef safe sunscreen, you're going to be set. And then, the other question, well, what about mood? People say, I need to be outside in order to feel good. There is actually data that sunlight hitting on the retina stimulates serotonin production and can help with mood. There are well-documented changes in psychiatric states, seasonally dependent, not just depression, and it's the middle of winter, and our winters are pretty mild, right? We don't get that dark that soon, although you may, if you work long hours, you may leave to work when it's dark and come home when it's dark. It's different than kind of the northern latitudes where it may only be light for a couple hours a day. But sunglasses are okay, because the light that actually boosts the serotonin is visible light. Sunglasses are mildly reducing visible light, but they're blocking UV light. So you're still going to see plenty of things while you're wearing sunglasses. So you don't have to feel like sunglasses are going to prevent you from developing, happiness from being out in the sun. Being active is also quite good for mood. And so being out and doing things. My personal approach, having dealt with skin cancers that were frighteningly too close to my eyes, I wear a wide brim hat. I wear UV protective sunglasses. I wear a UV protective rash guard when I'm out. And I'm going to be out for a long time. We went paddleboarding a week ago on the James by Powhatan State Park, out there for 3 hours. I had surfer leggings and I didn't get any sun at all. And so I do that when, we go out hiking. Fortunately, we have good dense woods where it's deep shade a lot of the times for places that you go. But I bring sunscreen. I apply face sunscreen on my neck, my ears, my whole face, my arms, anything that's going to be sun exposed. T-shirts are not sufficient for being out and protecting yourself from the sun. It's really got to be a UPF protective clothing. A regular thin T-shirt's about a UPF of 5, as opposed to those 50 pluses. But they do come in more and more fashionable items. And so that's what I do. I also take the niacinamide because I don't want yet another one. And that was sort of my childhood of growing up in Florida, not wearing sunscreen, not knowing any better. And I was already a skin cancer oncologist before I started getting them. So that sort of came to me as kind of you get what you treat. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you guys for listening. Yes, ma'am.
On the cream that you get, basic cream and it says it's UV protected. How protected is that? It says your moisturizer. It comes and says it's UV protected.
It should tell you have an SPF on that.
It does.
So
is it?
So if it has an SPF, that's a sun protection factor.
Okay.
And then for the face, it tends to be about 25 or higher is recommended. 15. Once you start getting much higher than 25, you're already blocking so much that going from 25 to 30 or 30 to 40 is, lower rates of return than going from nothing to a 25.
You said put scent.
I put it, people are out walking around. The sun is always beaming on your ears.
Yeah.
It's always on the back. It's always on here. This is just touch your ear. It's like, it's soft. It's tender skin. Never done that?
Not my ears, no, but
Yeah, you'll see some older folks that it, looks like they got chips sticking out of their ears along the way because they get, and wearing ball caps protects here, right? But it doesn't ever protect your ears. And so the back of the neck, these are all places that you don't see as well. You can't pay attention to your own skin back there as easily because it's really hard to have the right kind of mirror set up to do that.
What's the name of the sunblock you use?
I use Elta MD, ELTA.
MD.
And then that's the one I use for my face as my everyday, my face and my hands. And then we have a couple of different reef safe body sunscreens that we use on our arms for like going out to the pool or the beach. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I'm sure I can find it. Yes.
On the spray ones, which of course, at the beginning of the season, I bought a 4-pack.
Well, and you know, it's not the same as, I took out the slide that actually had there was a slide I had put in here that had like good ones versus bad ones, but the sprays, yes.
Did they do a study about the two chemicals that are absorbed or just that they were absorbed and?
So they have found that they are detectable in human blood samples at a threshold that triggered the FDA to say, we need to do more evaluation of this. There is nothing that has been linked between them and health issues in people. And so right now it's the kind of thing that we don't use the spray sunscreens on my daughter. She's 4. We use the zincs and the titanium sunscreens. We also have a bunch that we had purchased prior to that data that first came out. And so I'll bring one. It's like, say I'm going for a long bike ride or something. When you're out there and sweaty, it's really hard to get the creams and kind of rub them in. But so I'll spray on periodically. I use it in moderation. Predominantly, I use the non-absorbables now, and I just kind of have that as a backup if I need it. And I don't use it on young kids, the sprayables.
Yeah, if I had to stop and put lotion on it, it probably wouldn't happen, so.
Right. And so like when I'm out doing yard work, mostly what I do is I have a hat and a rash guard. And the UP protective shirts now are wicking enough that they're light colored, they're reflective, they wick, so it's actually not hot. You get hotter being just out in the sun than you do wearing it. And so that's what I do, you know, when I'm out in the garden, because I'm always bending over doing something like that. And so by having that with a wide brim hat, my back is totally protected, my arms are protected. I don't have to worry about, did I sweat it off, what's happening next, and then I just rinse off when I'm done.
Yeah, back of my arms get the most suntan, anything.
Mm-hmm.
More bending over.
For the same reason. So if you found yourself a really lightweight, you know, UV protective shirt, you would find that would go away.
Yeah, some of my workers have them, and we were talking about spray and absorption. Somebody saw something and something, so we had the big discussion. What'd you use? What'd you use? Also, I heard on one of the news programs that Europe has better suntan products, but they're not approved by the FDA, so we can't get them here.
There are some various different chemicals. You're talking about like tanning products or to try to prevent you from having sun damage. Often there are some molecules that people are using here as sort of like these youth serums that can cause problems. There's a lot of unregulated stuff when people try to create those. That's kind of like a sort of a TikTok fad to find more youth. In general, companies will try to seek European and US regulatory approval for valid molecules because the US is a huge commercial market. If you could pull that off, there's a lot of sales in that. And so I have not done deep dives into why those chemicals haven't made it over here. I think that there were some incomplete safety understandings on it, but I don't know. Dig deeper. Yeah. I knew there was gonna be something about the what's out there in popular discussion that I missed.
Also, the nicotinamide, is that over the counter?
It is. Yeah, this is just it's available on Amazon. This is considered a supplement. Just vitamin B. This one in particular happens to have resveratrol, which is a anti-aging molecule that's what's found in grape skins, which is why they say, oh, drink more wine and make you young. Maybe not as much wine as we drank to justify it. But primarily I got it because of the nicotinamide in here. So 500 milligrams, that's over the counter. It ends up being, I think that bottle, which is 120 capsules. So that's 2 months, $22, something like that. So it's pretty cheap. $10 a month.
Yeah, everybody.
Yeah. You know, there's not all that many randomized trials that had a group of patients with enough patients where they gave people a vitamin and a placebo and were able to show an effect. Right. All righty.
Well, you see the patient that was on fire, that person scattered everywhere. Treatments are, is it chemo? Is it radiation? Is it cutting out? Is it all the above?
None of the above.
None of the above.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
immunotherapy. So the idea behind how immunotherapy works, right? Your immune system is designed to recognize self, the parts that make up you as you, that's good, and the stuff that wants to make you sick, viruses, bacteria, amoeba, fungus, molds, right? That's bad. So your immune system is supposed to destroy the stuff that wants to make you ill and leave healthy you alone. And because it's biology, anything in that spectrum can happen. You can have people that can't fight off infections. They can be born with it, like the bubble boy. They can have a doctor do it to them, like somebody trying to keep you from, you know, rejecting a transplanted kidney. And you can have other people on the other side of the coin whose immune system gets carried away and attacks healthy parts of their own body. We call that autoimmune disease, self-immune disease. And so there's a whole collection of autoimmune diseases. There's a field called rheumatology that treats it. Eczema is a simple example, but rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, childhood onset diabetes, Graves' disease, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, all different aspects where the immune system is attacking a different part of your body, whether it's the, you know, the insulation on nerves and MS or the lining of the joints in your knuckles and rheumatoid arthritis. And so now you've got this third actor, this mutant version of you. It's not so mutated that it's an amoeba, but it's definitely not the same as you. And the immune system has the potential to recognize these things as being bad. Normally, in the healthy immune system, there's a big checks and balances to try to keep the immune system balanced, where it fights off things that's not supposed to be there, but leaves other things alone. And what you have to do is use these drugs that basically tilt the balance and essentially move your immune system this way. It makes you less tolerant towards yourself, but it can make you intolerant towards mutant self. And so wherever your immune system is going by and surveying, it's basically, you know, the passport person who's checking the papers on every cell in your body, comes across this, it's like, that's bad, and then it fights it and destroys it. If you overshoot with the immune therapies, you can trigger autoimmune diseases, but fortunately those rates are less than with most chemotherapy side effects. So these drugs don't actually even target the cancer. These drugs target your immune system to get it to recognize that that's a bad actor. It's doing things it's not supposed to be doing, and it needs to go. And then once you have that, you've got memory. So if there's little seedlings, other places that want to grow up later, it can find those and destroy those. And the cancer can't mutate back to normal. So that's what allows people to have that like long-lasting control when it works. It doesn't work for every cancer, for every person yet, but every year that goes by, we have new breakthroughs for different diseases. These drugs work in over 20 cancers.
So these are pills.
IV infusions.
IV. You do blood work on me, but you know where I gotta get done. You figure out how much to give me. And then I go through this for
Years,
months, years.
sometimes. If it's after surgery, we can do it anywhere as short as 8 weeks or as long as a year. If somebody's otherwise in remission, once somebody has active cancer, it can be years on treatment.
So how long has it been around like you treat? Because I know friends have had all the things I talked about 5, 10, 15 years ago.
So depending on the cancer, so these drugs were the first medicines to win the Nobel Prize in medicine for transforming how we treat cancer, and they won that in 2018. The very first immune therapy that changed the course of clinical care was 2011, was the very first immunotherapy, and that was not the best drug. The better drugs that came online were about 2013, 2014. They've really been about 10 years, but it started in skin cancers and now covers, you know, throat cancer, lung cancer, esophagus cancer, stomach cancer, liver cancer, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, you name it. It basically covers most. But it doesn't cover some of the most important cancers. It has limited effect in most types of breast cancers. It doesn't really work in prostate cancer yet, but they're working. Doesn't really work all that well in colon cancer. So 3 of the big 4, it's not as effective. It's approved in all forms of advanced skin cancers. We do it pre-surgical, and train the immune system on the tumor, get this big inflammatory response at the time of surgery, and that boosts cure rates significantly. The numbers are looking really good when we can give treatment before surgery for operable disease. That even works really well in lung cancer, getting immune therapy before lung cancer. And so part of that is, a talk for another day, which is early cancer detection, blood-based cancer screening, and things like that. There are ways where in 5 years from now, you'll be able to get cancer screening through blood tests that can say, hey, you're great to go, or you need to go see somebody. We're worried about a liver problem.
So my wife's got pulmonary fibrosis, so she takes OFAC right now, which is a trial. Is that the same kind of treatment? Do you know?
I am not familiar with that particular agent.
Yeah, I don't, but, okay. So then I had prostate.
In pulmonary fibrosis, the goal is to stop the immune system and the scarring, which is the opposite. So my wife's a rheumatologist, so I give immune therapy drugs all the time and some really intensive combinations for really difficult disease because we're a referral center and people run out of other ideas. The side effect profile is essentially the whole thing that she does with her practice for treating. So I joke with her, it's like, you treat everything that I cause in terms of side effects, which is great because I can ask her questions. I was like, I don't understand what's happening. Have I done this? Did I do something? How do I treat this? And she can help me. So in the immune-mediated diseases, there are ways to try to keep the immune system calmed down through one dysregulated pathway that's driving a pulmonary fibrosis or a joint problem. Against cancer, we kind of used like bigger tools that just basically kind of have more effects.
So I had prostate, that's how I got to Susan. So I had surgery, so this wouldn't have.
So we do surgery in early stage melanoma. So the key is for somebody who has a history of melanoma to go see their dermatologist, 3 to 4 times a year, because you cut off a little tiny one like this. If it's grown deep, if the roots into your skin are less than 1 millimeter, you're done. If the roots are greater than 4 millimeters, you're coming to see me, and we're going to be talking about treatment for a year.
So the last question I'll ask you then is that you're helping me understand, and Evie probably the same. We've been through Susan Hong, we've been through Perellis, Dr. Perellis, you, and the last one, Wally Smith. So with sickle cell, all in your medical world, is this what he's got for sickle cell now that can cure people?
No. That's a very interesting way to.
Because he says he can cure X amount of people with a US drug company. He could cure 50 people in Richmond right now. Is how great it is, but it's not the same kind of therapy.
It's not. It's a form of gene therapy. So you're basically sickle cell developed in the malaria belt because mosquitoes carry this parasite that gets into your blood as it bites you and replicates and causes rupture of blood cells, makes you very, very sick, high fevers, joint pains, kidney failure, things of that nature. It's very, very dangerous to children. And malaria is bad air, mal-air. And that was what they thought. Nobody knew that it was a mosquito-borne illness. And the sickle cell trait, where you have one copy of the sickle cell gene and one normal copy, carries some protection from malaria or the severest effects of malaria. So as that trait developed, there was a reproductive fitness because it's so dangerous for children to get malaria that if you had a trait, then you were protected and had a better chance of moving forward. And so it's essentially the southern Mediterranean coast and the North African. There are genes that come through, and there's others that came through for similar infectious disease reasons, thalassemias and things of that nature. And so what you have to do is you have to get rid of the hemoglobin S or sickle and replace it with a normal hemoglobin. And that is how gene therapies work. And we use those types of things to create modified genes in people and modified cells as part of treatments of leukemias and lymphomas. It's a type of treatment called CAR T. And it's pretty fascinating what we are able to do to modify and manipulate the body to remove inherited diseases, to treat cancers, to basically deliver what you need to make up for what's not working or broken.
So when you're using multiple myeloma, does yours work for that disease?
You can. There are CAR Ts for multiple myeloma.
They have developed, yeah, I know what they're using.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How do you find a dermatology office that's accepting new patients?
Are they not accepting new patients?
Well, most of my doctors are at VCU Health and
VCU's dermatology program is very small and very limited access. I like Absolute Dermatology. I like Dermatology Associates of Virginia. Those are two great practices.
Dermatology of what?
Associates of Virginia. Yeah, and then Richmond Dermatology and Laser Specialists would be the third one. Those are all three great groups. And
You can't get in.
I know that, and you can't get in, you can't get a residency spot in coming out of med school. I think there's some racket. They're like,
Yeah.
you work hard, so you're guaranteed to have a 4-month wait in your practice. But yeah, I don't understand, but the community practices, they're big. They might have 15 dermatologists, each of who can see 35 to 40 people in a day. Like, that's a lot of scale for what and what the medical academic dermatologists see, like at VCU, is the really, really difficult things that you can't see if you're seeing 35 people a day. The complex medical dermatology, like blistering disorders, skin breakdown problems, really complicated things they do. So, but for skin cancer detection and prevention,
that's not fun enough for them.
I don't think that they have the bandwidth because they're filled with the referral stuff, and there's just not enough of them. Because the reality is in order to work at an academic center, you are taking anywhere from a 40 to a 60% pay cut from what you could get in private practice. And so what you're making up for it in is education, research, public health initiatives. All of those things are not done while you're in clinic. So you're not in clinic 5 days a week like a practicing dermatologist in a community practice. You might be in clinic for 2.5 days a week, and then you're doing other research or educational related things. And so you're not really a full-time clinician. You're a part-time clinician, part-time teacher, part-time administrator, part-time researcher. So their bandwidth is smaller number for number of docs.
Can she say that she need just a spot check with them
Yeah,
and get in?
you should. I mean, if you have a spot you're worried about, certainly can say that. If you're just like, listen, I want to get in and be seen, then just say, this is what I need. Have you ever had a skin cancer? I don't need to pry on this.
Yeah, basic cell.
Right there, yeah, on the bridge. So you would qualify for the sun shading waiver. I don't know how much driving around town you end up doing. But if it's a fair bit, get your windshield done. There's no reason to not have UV protection. You can also get some ceramic coating in it that actually reflects the infrared as well, which heats up your car. So your car doesn't have to be quite so hot in summer. So there's some nice things about it.
Her staff's out in the sun all the time, or no? Your staff,
My staff, yeah.
they're out in the sun all the time.
and I drive from Ridgeland into town.
So you're a great employee, you care about it, I mean, but
And you have staff that work for you that have like the long hats and the cloths around their neck and long sleeve shirts and.
Most of them wear something like that. Long sleeves are pretty in. I haven't been able to transition from my bathing suit days and some lifeguarding days, so.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a psychological thing. It's like, wow, God, I gotta wear long sleeves and it's already really hot out. Do I really want to do that? And then you're like, I'm gonna be sweating either way.
Right.
And then you find out it's actually okay. You sort of stops bothering you pretty quickly.
Okay, on the sunshades,
Mhm.
how do you know there are UV?
It'll tell you when you buy
Even
them.
though it says it on there, they just, how do you know they just didn't stick? Put a sticker on there, you know what I'm saying? I'm get scammed, Debbie.
Don't buy from Temu.
No, I
he
don't.
agrees with that.
Somebody's pro Temu. I'm not like anti Temu, but I do worry about.
BBB is.
Are you?
Yes.
It just seemed to me like a way to spend not as much money on a lot of junk. This
Yes.
is probably not very high quality.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that can stay in the recording then. But the reality is if you buy from a reputable location, it'll tell you. And even cheap plastics are pretty good at UV. So you can get good UV protection from cheap. You know, remember those in the old days, they had those blue blocker commercials? Those people had those horrible like vans over their eyes. They were the cheapest plastic sunglasses you could buy, but they were dense and cheap enough that they actually blocked UV radiation really, really well. Whereas auto glass, high quality glass, gonna let that UVA right on through.
So if I go to like a Dollar Tree
And it says UV on it.
and it says UVA, I'm just,
Yeah, I think you're gonna be okay.
Just to keep my, you know.
Uh-huh, oh, absolutely.
Not my good glasses, but just going outside.
The one that you're not afraid of losing if you're out doing
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Splurge a little. Not for doing junk work, I just want something so in case I, busted.
Well, you can get some pretty good ones on Amazon for about $20, US made, if that's what you're looking for. And they talk about what the kind of UV protection they have on there.
You see a lot of roofers coming in and stuff in your in your work or no?
It's really the spectrum. So
Mexico and or South America, is their skin pigmentation or?
they're
whatever it is
protected to a degree.
Different,
Mhm.
different.
Yeah,
They work up there, they don't all wear glasses, which they should.
but many
Represent a
do.
lot
I
of-
mean, honestly, I see better sun hygiene practiced by darker skinned individuals. Like when we were in the Bahamas, better sun hygiene was practiced by darker skinned individuals than, the let's get as red and pink as possible.
Right,
And I see, you look at the construction workers out on the road, they're wearing long sleeves and the hats with the drapes. People that are out really in the sun are doing that. There is a significant skin cancer protection from it. Now, you can still get photo aging, so you could still get more wrinkly and stuff like that, but your cancer risks are lower. That I see patients, this is an interesting thing that I tell people. So there was a while about 10 years ago that they were trying to figure out if there was something about Viagra that caused melanoma. Because what they found was that in men who had melanomas, there was a higher rate of Viagra prescriptions than the rest of the population. And so they're trying to figure out this biology. What could it be? What could it be? And this is one of those things of a correlation, but not a causation. And so they did all this biology. We actually had some laboratory science that said the class of drugs have a lot of beneficial effects beyond just lung function and erectile function. So why would it cause skin cancer? And it wasn't. And they actually were able to conclude after a lot of analysis that it was what they referred to as the Viagra lifestyle, which is a middle-aged white male who's got a little bit of disposable income, goes on beach vacations, likes to play golf, right? May have a boat, goes out and does all of these sun exposure items as opposed to the Viagra actually causing, it was just part of that
Right.
lifestyle. So do I see skin cancers in golfers? Yes. Lots of skin cancers in golfers, lots on the ears, back of the neck, nose, bridge, things like that. I see it in farmers. I see it in landscapers. I see it in young people. I've got the youngest person I have with melanoma is in their early 20s right now. And I've got everything up to 95-year-olds. So, it only takes one weird mole to be the thing. You don't have to be riddled with mold to develop a melanoma.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I hope you guys liked it.
Thank you.
Looks like we could-